if I told you there are prisons so brutal, so terrifying, that even the most dangerous cartel members dread being sent there? These are the prisons where survival isn't guaranteed, and where the conditions are so harsh, it's like living in a nightmare. From the isolation of ADX Florence in the US to the gang-controlled chaos of La Sabaneta in Venezuela, these prisons are brutal. So let's explore the places cartel members fear the most. 1. ADX Florence, USA. If you've ever wondered where some of the most dangerous criminals in the world end up, it's ADX Florence, also known as the Alcatraz of the Rockies. This place is a supermax prison located in the middle of nowhere in Colorado. The prison is designed to house the worst of the worst, including cartel members, terrorists, and even notorious gang leaders. And when I say house, I don't mean in any way that's remotely comfortable. ADX Florence is often described as a living nightmare, and many believe that the isolation there is worse than death. Let's break it down. First off, ADX Florence is built to keep inmates completely isolated. Most prisoners spend 23 hours a day locked up in their tiny cells. These cells are like concrete boxes, about the size of a bathroom, and they barely get to leave them. When they do, it's just for 1 hour to either exercise in a small enclosed area or take a shower. There's no yard to socialize in, no prison groups, and no mingling with other inmates. The point is to keep these guys away from everyone, including each other. They can't touch or see another human being, and even when they are moved from place to place, they have to be restrained and accompanied by multiple guards. This level of control and surveillance is extreme. Reports from the prison mention inmates suffering from depression, hallucinations, and mental breakdowns. For even the toughest cartel bosses who thought they could handle anything, this level of isolation can break them. One of the most infamous cartel leaders, Joaquin El Chapo Guzman, is serving his life sentence here. He used to run one of the largest and most powerful drug cartels in the world, and even managed to escape prison in Mexico twice. But ADX Florence is a whole different game. The level of security at this place is so intense that there's pretty much zero chance of escape. Everything is monitored 24/7, every movement, every word, and even every breath. 2. La Sabaneta, Venezuela. It's known as one of the most violent and overcrowded prisons in the world, and honestly, just surviving there is a daily battle. Cartel members who end up in La Sabaneta face way more than just serving time for their crimes. Inside, it's a lawless environment where survival is the only goal. Let me explain why La Sabaneta is so terrifying. First of all, this place is extremely overcrowded. There aren't enough cells or even beds for everyone, so prisoners are crammed together in the worst conditions you can imagine. And because the prison is so full, there's barely enough food, water, or medical care to go around. Now, you'd think the guards would be there to keep things in check, right? Wrong. La Sabaneta is known for having very few guards, and the ones that are there don't have much control. Instead of the guards running the prison, it's mostly controlled by the gangs inside. This makes it extremely dangerous because the gangs have all the power. If you're not in a gang or can't afford protection, you're on your own. And in a place like this, being on your own can be deadly. Violence is pretty much the norm here. Prisoners get into fights all the time, and it's not uncommon for someone to get killed over something as small as food or space to sleep. Stabbings, beatings, and even murders happen regularly, and there's really no one to stop it. With so many people packed into such a small space, there's no proper sanitation. People get sick all the time from things like tuberculosis and other infections, and because there's no proper medical care, a lot of them die. Malnutrition is another big issue. Prisoners don't get enough food, and what they do get is barely enough to survive. For cartel members used to being powerful and well-fed on the outside, being thrown into this chaos is a huge shock. 3. El Hongo, Mexico. El Hongo, located in Baja California, Mexico, is one of the country's most secure prisons, and it's not the kind of place where cartel members get to keep their power. Unlike some other Mexican prisons where rich and powerful criminals can bribe their way into getting luxuries, El Hongo doesn't work like that. This prison is all about strict discipline, and it's known for being really tough, especially on cartel inmates. First off, El Hongo is like a military base in the way it's run. Everything is controlled to the smallest detail. There are no luxuries here, no special treatment, no fancy meals, no private cells for the cartel bosses. These guys, who were used to running entire drug empires and having anything they wanted on the outside, lose all of that once they step into El Hongo. Inmates are watched constantly. El Hongo has heavy surveillance with cameras everywhere, and the guards enforce strict rules. If you break even the smallest rule, like not following orders fast enough, the punishment is harsh. The level of control is so intense that some prisoners say it feels like being in the military. There's no room for mistakes, and the punishments can include anything from being thrown into solitary confinement to losing any tiny privileges you've earned. Another thing that makes El Hongo so different is that it focuses on keeping the prisoners in line with total control. Every movement is monitored, and even things like talking to other inmates are heavily restricted. The security is tight, and the facility is built to be nearly impossible to break out of. Cartel members, who are known for escaping other Mexican prisons with the help of bribery or tunnel systems, don't have a chance here. El Hongo has some of the highest security measures in Mexico, so once you're in, there's no getting out. 4th Carandiru Penitentiary, Brazil. Carandiru Penitentiary, located in São Paulo, Brazil, was one of the most notorious prisons in the world before it was shut down in 2002. Even though it's been closed for over 20 years now, its terrible reputation still sticks. First off, Carandiru was infamous for being massively overcrowded. The prison was built to hold around 4,000 inmates, but at its peak, it was packed with over 8,000 prisoners. That's double what it was designed for, and the conditions were horrible because of it. There were way too many people crammed into tiny cells, and there weren't enough resources like food or clean water. Prisoners had to fight just to survive, and the overcrowding made everything worse. Sanitation was a huge problem at Carandiru. There wasn't enough access to clean water, and the bathrooms were disgusting, with sewage often leaking everywhere. Because of this, diseases spread quickly inside the prison. Tuberculosis, HIV, and other infections ran rampant, and medical care was pretty much non-existent. Inmates who got sick had little hope of getting better because the prison was so neglected. Living in those conditions was enough to break even the toughest prisoners. On top of that, Carandiru was one of the most violent prisons in history. Gangs controlled much of what happened inside, and the guards didn't really have any control over the situation. One of the darkest moments in Carandiru's history was the 1992 prison riot. Things got completely out of control, and over 100 inmates were killed in just a few hours. The riot started as a conflict between rival groups, but when the police were called in to break it up, they used extreme force. Many of the prisoners who died were killed by police gunfire, and the incident became a symbol of how brutal the prison system in Brazil could be. The violence at Carandiru was so intense that it shocked the entire country, and people started questioning how the prison was being run. Even though Carandiru was shut down in 2002, its legacy still lives on. 5. San Pedro Prison, Bolivia. San Pedro Prison in Bolivia is really different from most prisons you hear about. It's almost like a small town inside a prison, where the prisoners actually run everything themselves. That might sound like a good thing at first, especially for powerful cartel members who are used to being in control. But the reality inside San Pedro is a lot tougher and more dangerous than you'd think. The prison is more like a self-contained community where inmates have to buy or rent their own cells, which can cost a lot of money. If you don't have cash, you're stuck living in the worst conditions. STM Extra Minutes. Rusty Young's 4 months inside notorious San Pedro prison cartel members who end up in San Pedro might think they can just take over like they did on the outside, but it's not that simple. In San Pedro, everything revolves around money and power. If you're rich, you can afford a nice cell, buy better food, and even hire protection from other inmates. There are actual businesses inside the prison. People sell food, clothing, and even services like laundry. Some prisoners have cell phones or access to luxuries that make life easier, but only if they can pay for it.